I always wanted to build a car. I always thought that I could build a better car than anybody else. My name is Peter Kalikow. I was a car builder from 1970 until 1973. We built a sports car called the Mirage. It was one of the most enjoyable and painful experiences of my life. I was 26, and when you're that age, there's nothing you can't do, right?
It was crazy. Who would think that a young man is going to go out and manufacture cars? Doesn't happen.
What's so cool about a story like this is it's rooting for the underdog. And in a way, it's almost like David versus Goliath. And so if we want to say Goliath is Ferrari or Maserati or Aston Martin or whoever, and then along comes David here, and he can build something as good. And he did.
Kalikow is the son and grandson of builders. His grandfather, Joseph, a Russian immigrant, started a family business 61 years ago that created 12,000 apartments in Brooklyn and Queens. Kalikow has made his own fortune by bringing the family business into Manhattan.
The business was founded by my grandfather. He had 3 sons, my dad being one of them. This is my grandfather. He was born in 1882. He died in 1955. He was the founder of the company. This is my dad. He was born in 1909, and he died in 1983. I don't know who this guy is. Somebody put his picture up here, but probably should take it down before anybody sees it.
It's funny, he looks a lot like you.
Yeah, well,
Eyes, a shirt.
well, shows you I haven't changed much in all those years, right? Let me just bring my jacket in because I need my keys. I can lock up. You know, I was really close with my dad, which everybody knew. What they didn't know that I was close to my mom. You know, I remember one time I built my first building, I had this crisis. And I called her up. I said, what do I do? She said, finish the building. She said, I know one thing. A completed building is worth something, a half-completed building is worth nothing. She said, I don't care what it cost you, finish the damn building. And the building cost $1 million more than it was supposed to, which was a shitload of money back then, but it was finished. Rented up for more than we thought, and it was okay. When I had my head filled with the success that I had, I told my father I want to build a car. I always wanted to build a car. I always thought that I could build a better car than anybody else. But my interest in cars started at about 14. I started buying the magazines, Road and Track and Sports Cars Illustrated, which became Car and Driver. And then, of course, what happened when I was 15, because I went to the auto show and I saw my first Ferrari. And then it really started to become intense.
If you ever have the opportunity to see the garage where he keeps all his cars, it's got to be one of the best collections in the world. The most important to him, I guess, would be the Momo Mirage, because he built that from scratch.
This was the first car. This car was the Momo Mirage. This is where we made all our mistakes. Most of them we fixed on the second car. This one is number 2, and I drove this car more than 160 miles an hour. This is the production prototype. This is designed and was built exactly as it was built on the assembly line. Let's see if this sucker will start. Hey, Mark. Well, anyway, now you believe me, the car runs, right? My vision of car building came by my studying in my mid-teens. The stories of these car manufacturers, especially the specialty manufacturers, and what they built. I had this idea in my head about what car I would want. The conservative, well-built, beautifully made, comfortable, high performance, high-end GT car that you would like to drive yourself. In the old days, a GT car was a luxurious car that was meant for two people to travel from city to city.
You need me to spell the name or not? Winston Goodfellow, writer and photographer in the auto industry. I shoot, I write, I used to test drive a lot. So it's been a long time since I've looked at a car and not known what it was. America had nothing that rode or felt like this, let alone was built like this, let alone looked like this. He was offering Ferrari performance with American reliability and Jaguar comfort.
There's a lot of designing, testing, and trial runs behind every new innovation or new performance record. How do I know? My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
Many people have used the idea of the sophistication of what Europe has to offer with the reliability of what America has to offer to try and make the perfect car. They almost always went belly up.
How does a guy in his 20s, like, even think he can manufacture a car? And the kind of car he was talking about, you know, was on the same level of all these high-end foreign cars.
Starts with people that said you'll never make a car because, you know, in their mind they looked at GM, Ford, Chrysler, and at that time there was American Motors. Look how big they are. They got 25 factories, they have millions of cars, they have thousands of people working for them. How can you make a car?
When we think of like a General Motors or a Ford, you think of automated production lines with welding machines, this, that, and the other thing. This wasn't like that at all. This is almost like if you got a bunch of Da Vinci's or the best sculptors that you could imagine and you put them in a room. And you said, okay, we're gonna make this.
Whether it's welding the body together or making the frame, they're hand-assembled cars.
This was all built by hand, shaped by hand, laminated by hand, cut by hand. It was done the way they would have done it all the way back into the 30s.
I wanted to make 100, 150 cars a year to a certain clientele would appreciate the design, the ride, the handling, the performance, and give them what I thought was something that nobody else gave them.
Peter was an outsider, but he knew enough people that were involved in the trade in one way or another. So when he started kicking around the idea of, hey, there might be this sweet spot in the marketplace, he had the guys who could facilitate doors opening to the right people over in Italy to get things done.
There was a guy named Alfred Momo who was the chief engineer of Jaguar of the United States. Momo was 45 years older than me, but in his youth, he was a little bit like me. He was headstrong, energetic, and he was self-taught. I was this kid that used to go around, you know, and look at the race cars with my hands in my pockets, hoping that nobody would throw me out, right, you know. And he kind of took a liking to me, and he loved cars, as did I.
It was in early 1968 that Peter kind of started talking about what he saw in the marketplace and his idea for a car. Well, the two guys start talking, and it just immediately runs from there.
I said to Momo, you built a car. you know, is it that hard? And the answer is, of course, it was hard. It was harder than even he thought. But, you know, enthusiasm is really a great thing to have, and it's what makes people do things. In 1969, we took a trip to Italy for the express purpose of analyzing the supply market, the constructor's premises, and the engineering talent to actually engineer a car. Momo knew everybody, and he now introduces me to all the coach builders. And we get to see Enzo Ferrari. We meet Alfieri from Maserati. We went down the road to meet with Lamborghini. I mean, I'm a 24-year-old kid meeting these guys, and they're actually having conversations with me.
You've got the young kid with the idea in the pocketbook. You've got almost like his mentor who wants to make sure he doesn't go wrong. So you need the right guys to engineer, design, and assemble the car.
We hadn't yet done a design or a concept, but I was trying to put away how it was going to get made. And we hired a guy who worked for Momo, who had gone out on his own, named Hugo Bergoni.
Hugo Bergoni was a former Fiat engineer, experienced, speaks the language fluently, and so Hugo, having been a Fiat engineer, could do that either in English or Italian, and therefore was a very precise interpreter. He was one of the linchpins in moving the thing forward in an expeditious manner.
Without Hugo, there'd be no car. Hugo was everybody's liaison with everybody else.
If you can get in a project where you're not just doing part of it, and you've been hired to design a chassis or build some body panels or whatever, and you're going to be involved in building a whole new car with a whole new car company, that's exciting. It doesn't come along very often.
I think Enzo Ferrari had one of the best sayings, which is basically the heart of the car is the engine. And so much of a car's personality and characteristics will come from that engine. The chassis, the frame, is another major thing. That is your skeleton. You know, everything else hangs on that. And then you've got the body of the car. That's what do you look like?
We had decided that the basis of the car was going to be the chassis, and the most important piece of the chassis was going to be the engine. The engine at the time was the most high-performance engine made in the United States. But we wanted to explain to the customer that we were doing something other than just taking a Chevy engine out of a box and sticking it in his car. It was something that Chevy wouldn't give him. We were going to base our car on a standard Corvette high-performance engine with a 4-barrel carburetor. The guy who designed the chassis for us, the engineer, was Giulio Alfieri, who was chief engineer of Maserati. Alfieri would be the designer of the car, and he would find me guys to do actually working out the details. I described what I wanted in the chassis to Alfieri. He said, yeah, everything you want is right. I said I want independent front suspension. I want the big girling brakes that the Aston has. I want rack and pinion steering. I want a full independent rear suspension. The more we spoke to him, the more I think he was liking what was going on there.
They were expecting to have a chassis made. When they went back a while later, it was only drawings. Oops. And so that's just part of it. Guys get busy, this, that, and the other thing. And so they had to find someone that would reliably make the chassis. And so they went to Stanguellini.
Stanguellini owned a company that was a Fiat distributor in Modena, but also made racing cars. We go there, and there's this factory floor, one flight up over the Fiat dealership, with all these great race mechanics doing nothing. So that seemed like a perfect fit. Plus, it gave us a base of operations in Modena, too. We spent the next 3 months, say February, March, and April of '70, going around trying to find a coach builder. I have Mitchell from GM guaranteeing the engines. I have Alfieri designing my chassis. I got Momo shepherding this thing. I became real in everybody's eyes. At that point, Alfieri, he said, I have a relationship with Pietro Frua. This guy is really good. He does a lot of cars for us, and he's got a quality facility that he can make limited production. He had this great way of packaging the occupants, the fuel, and the luggage. And his workmanship was first rate.
One of the most fascinating things about making a car is the design process. The person behind the project has an idea in their head of what they want it to look like. I want it to be elegant, restrained, aggressive, powerful. You use all these adjectives, and then the designer, back then they were called stylists, had to interpret what you were saying.
I explained what I wanted in the car and how I wanted it to look. Now, Frua was a bit of an avant-garde designer back then. So I said, it has to be a little less flamboyant than what you're used to doing. He said he would do it. And he said, come back in a month, I'll have these great sketches for you. Now I'm really excited. When we first met with Frua, we described what we wanted. And he came back with this. This is Frua's first study. And I saw them, and my heart broke. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was really, they were horrible.
When you look at the volumes, what's the size of the cabin on the body, that type of thing, it's just a little bit off.
I said, okay. I really don't like this design. I spoke to Alfieri at this point. I said, Giulio, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. If this is what I got to do, I'd rather leave the car business. So now, for the first and only time in my whole car career, I had the stage. Because they were worried about me leaving. I started to say, I don't think these guys understand styling or marketing, but I got to get a styling and a body done.
One day he called me and he said, look, I've got a great concept of what I want to do. I'm ready to do something. I need somebody to design the car. Do you know somebody? The person is Gene Garfinkel. He worked at GM, and he's great to work with, a very capable designer. You give him a concept of what you want. He's the kind of guy who can do it.
What Peter did, which was smart, was they used a benchmark, the Lancia Marico. So that immediately gives you an idea of what the feel of it is going to look like.
I said, make me a body that's commensurate with this kind of car. Elegant, high speed, but finely styled. Okay, so it's now, let's say, April of '70. And Gene Garfinkel and I are working on a concept that nobody knows anything about. I worked with him for a few days, and he said, well, let me come up with some things, I'll bring them back to you. So you can see how that it looks like the eventual car that we built. Frua took Garfinkel's drawings, and he made them in a way that the car could be built. And he said, I can do this, and he gave me a model. And I said, I'm okay with this. Let's get going.
Peter's now established the right guys. And it almost becomes like a musical group, where you have this great synergy between all the players. There was a number of things that would have made it unique. The design was classically elegant. And there really wasn't anything that had the car's proportions and volumes. It looked very contemporary for the time, but it was very understated. You look at that car today, it still looks as good as it did when it was made in '71.
It is an art form, but it has to be an appliance that gets you from there to there. And it has to be beautiful. It has to handle very well. And it has to be, a car like these have to be very powerful. And that's a very difficult thing to do. The first time I took it out, I stopped at 125. I pulled over, we checked the air in the tires. You go want to look underneath, see if anything fell off. And then we went out again. And I said, we'll see how fast this sucker will go. I was scared shitless. Are you kidding? I'm driving a car that I designed and built.
Then comes validation. In late 1971, boom, cover story.
You know, in the car world, Road and Track is probably the most important magazine. And here's a guy, when he's in his 20s, late 20s, this is like the Emmy, the Oscar, to be on the cover with a car as an individual, going head-to-head with General Motors and Ford and Chrysler and all the big guys. And here is this magazine in December of '71 that has his car on the front cover.
If they give you a cover of a magazine, it's always a big achievement. You don't get those covers easily.
There it is. It's on the cover of the most prestigious automotive magazine in the US. This is a big hammer coming down. This says this thing's real.
This was probably one of my best days. I knew they were doing a story about it. I get the magazine in the mail. I said, whoa, what is this? And it was just unbelievable. I mean, it was more exciting that I didn't know it was going to be a cover. It was a shock. Still a shock. Now that I think about it.
And then one day, Peter called me up. He said he was ready to go. He had it, built the car, he brought it in. He said, we're going to the auto show, and you're going to help me sell it.
Can't describe it. You have no idea. There you are with GM and Ferrari and Ford and Maserati and Aston Martin, and there you are with something you made. It was something that nobody thought I could do. So yeah, yeah, if I had vest buttons, I would have busted them.
People just gravitated to the Momo, and it was incredible. They wanted to know what that new car was. I mean, it was like the hit of the show.
Well, we actually took deposits for about 30 cars. which astounded me. I think that it made a lot of people who were around me as enthusiastic or as hopeful for the project as I was. Because at that point, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to do this. It was when I thought we might succeed.
Look at this. We're on the cover. You're getting validation. Everyone's talking about it. It's like, holy Toledo. It's very clear this thing's got real traction. They were in the beginning throes of getting people knowing about it when the rug was pulled out from underneath them. Today, we just take for granted the instantaneousness of everything. Back then, you were dealing with 6 time zones and several thousand miles, and it just started creating all sorts of problems.
I was going to Italy 1 week out of 3 or 1 week out of 4, and that was 10 times a year, 11 times a year. That's a lot. You left Sunday night, you got there Monday morning. You go pick me up. We would drive down to Modena. We would start in and see what calamities were there, and then we would end up driving back to Turin, going to Frua's and seeing what he had done. You know, I have a feeling when I left, they'd stop working, and when I came back, they'd start working again, because nothing happened in the 3 weeks I wasn't there. I got married. I'm building buildings, and I'm, literally working 16 hours a day, 6 days a week.
I guess there was some stress, but I wouldn't say, well, maybe he was a little stressed out.
I was walking down the street from a restaurant, having lunch, to my hotel, and around the corner, all of a sudden I see thousands of people marching from sidewalk to sidewalk, as far as you could see, waving red banners. Go back to that scene in Dr. Zhivago, when they were marching down the street. That's exactly what it looked like. And I said, holy cow. In the period that I started, almost as if the car guide said, okay, we're gonna give this guy a really, really tough time. Italy had this series of strikes. The entire industry of Italy would just be plagued by these strikes that would just start and then stop. And it was almost impossible to get anything done.
He went over there expecting it to be kind of like it was over here, where, okay, yeah, you had some strikes, but it wasn't that prevalent. And we didn't have instant communication like we do today. So when strikes and stuff are going on over in Italy, American papers didn't report that, American television didn't report that, American radio didn't report that. He had no way of knowing. As you had this socialist mentality with the workers, the socialist mentality with the students, and they're both increasing at the same time. In May of 1968, all hell broke loose across most of Europe.
And in '69, you have the massive strikes that create what we refer to as the autunno caldo, the hot autumn.
From 1957 to 1967 was heaven. 1968 after was hell, because there were strikes all the time. And if one guy went on strike, everyone went on strike.
Parts would be held up, and it was hard to get a car built right at that time, and costs just went up.
A lot of his suppliers were just unable to deliver anything that they said. It was really terrible. I found out that the guy who was making the chassis for us was the head of the Communist Party movement in Modena, my foreman, who I liked. At night, he was like Jekyll and Hyde, you know?
With that as the backdrop, Frua gives him a price, Stanguellini gives him a price. And then all of a sudden, because there's shortage of materials, there's shortage of labor, prices started going up.
We were looking at a $13,000 or $14,000 sales price, and back then that was really big money, and they were costing us about 20 grand a piece to make.
He would have lost everything. So the only decision he had actually was to get out.
This was the Momo Corp entry, the official entry, and that was the loading dock. So this was going to be how you get into the factory, and that was going to be how you go into the offices or the showroom. Now, let me show you the other building. You got time to take a walk? Come on. So it's easy now to come back here and kind of remember all the fun we had, but I can remember riding down the street going from one office to the other, biting my nails, because nothing was coming in, nothing was going right. It was promises broken. I'll be here, guaranteed, you'll have everything here, promise, 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 promise. And then you stand there like this, nothing shows up.
I do remember at some point my mother said to him, you know what, it's enough. It's time to go back into real estate, and it's time to stay in real estate.
My dad said something very interesting to me. He said, and he was good about not saying, okay, stop. He wanted it to be my decision. And he said to me, you know, I've been in the real estate business my whole life, and I've never missed a meal. I bet you guys in the car business can't make that statement. And I said, okay, that's it. Everybody has a dream to build something. And I guess a lot of young boys have a dream to design and build their own car. And I was fortunate enough to get to express that dream. What I didn't realize was that dreams are dreams and reality is reality, and a lot of times they don't meet. Most times they don't meet.
You know, he's worked very hard his whole life. When it was real estate, the Post, the MTA, there's always a challenge. There's always something for him. I'm not sure what this next part, you know, would you refer to it as the third act? I mean, I would call it the ninth act.
I always used to finish stuff. I never left stuff undone. I never walked away from something that was, even when I was a kid, I wouldn't walk away. If I built my model airplanes or model cars or the trains that I had, I always completed everything.
For the first 7 years, Peter was still going full speed ahead, building things. There was the New York Post was on the agenda. He had many, many apartment buildings and everything. He controlled all of that stuff. And it was different back then. And then it sort of calmed down. And then after the paper went away, he became more at leisure, and the cars became more of the focal point.
I don't know what to tell you about the next stage in Peter's life, and it could be the reincarnation of the Momo car, because that wasn't as successful as he wanted it to be.
I like to think I'm not done. I like to think there's one more thing in me. I hadn't looked at it for God knows how long. all the parts. I didn't realize what I had. All those pieces we made, most of them are there. It's one of my storerooms with my treasures. But they're only treasures to me. Nobody else knows what they are.
My big surprise was the amount of material that was available. When I saw all the material he had in terms of gearbox suspension, etc., I understood that when he did it, he was extremely serious in doing it.
And my business had got to the point where it didn't require me to be there all the time. I spoke to the guys up in Connecticut about doing one of the cars over. I mean, one of the things the third act could be is making a series of Momos and selling them. Okay, so let me ask you.
From this analysis, you see how efficient is the Momo.
Oh, yeah.
It's very efficient because in this wheelbase, there is almost nobody that today is able to fit a 2+2.
Right. Plus a real seat in the back plus luggage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I never asked Peter why he wanted to start again. I think that in life there are things that you want to do, and when you can do it, when you can finish it, you do it, no matter how much it costs and what it takes.
This is one of our chassis that we are in the process of restoring, and we are going to finish it and create a new car with the parts that we have, except some body parts, which we'll have to remake.
Once we had the two mathematical model, we made a sort of marriage of the two parts.
These are the blueprints that were generated from the computer scan of chassis 102. You could, in fact, create a whole car from this. See that square hole up by the primer section there?
Everything he touches, he completes. Buildings, nothing is left halfway.
This is how it's in your blood. Now he's got it back. He's making them again. There's nothing that gets into your blood like that.
This is probably the longest stretch I've done anything on these cars since the early 70s.
As the RPM increases, you'll see that mixture come right out of the carburetor.
They begged him for many years to bring it to Italy because maybe they thought it actually was a Mirage.
In Italy, this would have taken 3 days.
Yeah.
Better watch out for me. Here I come. You know, it's funny. This car is like it was, I mean, I don't mean to be a wise guy, but it was like made for me, for somebody my height. Because I don't think that I felt as comfortable in any other car as I do in this one. You know, the last time I did this was 1971. I drove chassis 1. I am proud of it now. At the time, I wasn't because it wasn't a success. That bothered me. But if you make one car, you make 1,000 cars. The others are just numbers. It's the one car that's the thing.
love.